The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the silence of the abandoned textile mill, followed by the frantic barking of a black German shepherd. Detective James Carter hit the ground, clutching his side as blood seeped through his coat. "Belle, stay back," he rasped, but his loyal partner refused to move, her teeth bared at the shadowy figures closing in. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a betrayal. Someone inside the force wanted him dead. And whoever it was had just made their first mistake, leaving him alive. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming and emotion that you won't want to miss. The rain fell steadily over Manchester, casting a damp veil over the city. The sound of water dripping from the cracked roof of the old textile mill echoed eerily in the silence. Detective Inspector James Carter adjusted his coat as he stepped into the dimly lit building, his trusted K-9 partner, Belle, a sleek black German shepherd, walking closely beside him. Reports had come in about suspicious activities, an arms deal rumored to be happening in this decrepit part of Ancoats. The mill was a shadow of its industrial past, its vast hallways now crumbling, filled with echoes of long-gone machines and an unsettling quiet. Belle's sharp ears twitched, and her nose brushed the damp ground, sniffing the air. "What is it, girl?" Carter whispered, his fingers tightening on the flashlight in his left hand and the handle of his pistol in the right. The K-9 let out a low growl, her tail stiffening. It was a sign Carter knew all too well, danger was near. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice barely audible over the pattering of rain. They moved deeper into the building, weaving through corridors and rusting machinery. Carter's flashlight illuminated a trail of muddy footprints leading to a heavy steel door left slightly ajar. As he approached, his pulse quickened, a sense of dread creeping over him. Belle suddenly barked, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed off the walls. The response was immediate and violent. Gunfire erupted from the shadows, bullets ricocheting off the walls around them. Carter dropped to the ground, pulling Belle down with him. "Ambush," he hissed into his radio, though the signal crackled with interference. The firefight was relentless. Carter managed to return fire, but there were too many of them. Belle lunged forward, a blur of teeth and muscle, taking down one of the assailants before retreating to cover. Then it happened, a sharp, searing pain tore through Carter's side. He collapsed against the cold concrete, his vision blurring. Belle barked frantically, standing over him, her fur bristling as she faced the armed men closing in. "Run, Belle!" Carter gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. But the loyal dog refused to leave his side. A final shot rang out, and everything went black. The steady beeping of a heart monitor was the first sound Detective James Carter heard as he slowly regained consciousness. His head throbbed, and his body felt like it had been crushed under the weight of a collapsing building. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, he tried to sit up but failed. "Don't try to move," a soft, firm voice said. A nurse appeared by his side, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're in Manchester General Hospital. You've been here for 3 days." 3 days? Carter's voice was hoarse, his throat dry as sandpaper. Memories of the ambush came flooding back, the gunfire, the searing pain, Belle's frantic barking. "My dog. Belle. Where's Belle?" The nurse hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "She's here. She's been outside the ward since you arrived. She refused to leave." Relief washed over Carter like a wave, but it was quickly followed by a gnawing worry. "Is she okay? Was she hurt?" "Some minor injuries, but she's fine. The veterinary team cleared her. She's waiting for you." The door creaked open, and a familiar bark filled the room. Belle bounded in, her movements slower than usual but her eyes bright and focused. She went straight to Carter's bedside, her nose brushing his hand. "Belle," Carter croaked, his voice breaking as he stroked her head. You saved my life." The dog whined softly, her tail wagging as she licked his fingers. Moments later, Carter's partner, Detective Sarah Mills, stepped into the room, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. "James, thank God you're awake." "Sarah," he said weakly. What happened?" "The ambush." "We were too late," Sarah admitted, sitting beside him. "You took 2 hits, one to your side and another grazed your arm. The team arrived just in time to pull you out, but the gang scattered." Belle held her ground until backup got there. Carter turned his eyes to Belle, who was now sitting protectively by his bed. "Good girl," he murmured. "But James," Sarah continued, her tone darkening, "this wasn't just an arms deal. The gang knew you were coming. Someone tipped them off. This was a setup." Her words hit Carter like a punch to the gut. A setup meant betrayal. Someone inside the department had sold them out. "Who?" he managed, his voice trembling with anger. "We're working on it," Sarah assured him. "But right now, you need to focus on getting better. The doctors, they weren't sure if you'd make it." Carter's gaze dropped to his injured side, the weight of her words settling on him. The pain was overwhelming, but the betrayal cut deeper. Belle let out a soft bark, nudging his hand again. Her presence was a reminder that, even in the face of betrayal, there was loyalty that could never be broken. Detective James Carter stared at the ceiling of his hospital room, the weight of Sarah's words pressing down on him like a physical force. Someone in the department had set him up. The thought gnawed at him relentlessly. Belle lay curled up on the floor beside his bed, her ears twitching at every sound in the hallway. She had refused to leave his side, even when the nurses tried to coax her away for a proper rest. Carter reached down, brushing his fingers through her fur. "Just you and me, huh?" he muttered. The dog's ears perked up, and she nuzzled his hand, her loyalty an unshakable comfort. The door opened, and Sarah Mills walked in, holding a stack of files and a cup of coffee. "Morning," she greeted, placing the files on a small table. Her usual sharp demeanor was softened by the dark circles under her eyes. "You look like hell," Carter rasped, managing a faint smirk. Sarah snorted. "Right back at you." She took a seat beside him, leaning forward. "I've been digging. The ambush, we're certain now it wasn't just bad luck. The gang wasn't just armed, they were prepared. They knew exactly where you'd be and when." Carter nodded grimly. "Someone inside gave them that information." Sarah's expression tightened. "The thing is, the leak had to come from someone who knew the operation's details. It was a small circle, just you, me, the chief, and a couple of others." She hesitated, then added, "And we've already started seeing discrepancies in the logs." Carter clenched his fist, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Do we have a name?" "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "But one of the gang members we caught after the ambush might have answers. He's in custody, and I've got a meeting with him later today. You'd want to be there, but," she gestured to his bed. "Let me guess," Carter said bitterly, "doctor's orders." "You've got a hole in your side, James," she shot back. "Don't get any ideas." Before Carter could respond, Belle suddenly stood, her body stiff, ears erect. She growled low, her attention fixed on the door. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her hand instinctively going to her hip where her weapon would usually be. Carter's sharp eyes followed Belle's gaze. Moments later, a shadow appeared under the doorframe, accompanied by faint footsteps. "Get ready," Carter warned, his voice dropping to a whisper. The door creaked open slowly, and a uniformed officer stepped in, his face unfamiliar. "Detective Carter?" Carter relaxed only slightly. "Yeah." The officer stepped forward, holding out an envelope. "This was left at the precinct for you. No return address." Carter exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded and took the envelope. She opened it cautiously, revealing a single sheet of paper with a hastily scrawled message. You were warned to stay away. Next time, we won't miss. Carter's jaw tightened, and Sarah's eyes darkened with fury. This just got personal, Carter growled. Belle let out another low growl, her instincts mirroring the tension in the room. Detective Sarah Mills sat across from the gang member in the interrogation room. The man, mid-30s with a shaved head and a broken nose, lounged in his chair with an air of smug defiance. His arms rested on the table, exposing a jagged tattoo of a wolf on his forearm. I don't know what you're hoping for, detective, he said, his voice thick with a Mancunian accent. I've got nothing to say. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her eyes cold and calculating. You've got plenty to say, Derek. You just don't realize how bad things are for you. She slapped a file onto the table, the sound echoing sharply in the small room. You're looking at attempted murder of a police officer. Add illegal arms dealing, and you're not seeing daylight for the next 30 years, minimum. Derek smirked, unshaken. You think threats scare me? No, Sarah said coolly. But I think this might. She slid a photograph across the table, showing the body of one of his associates, the one Belle had taken down during the ambush. Derek's expression faltered for a split second, his smirk slipping before he masked it with bravado. What's this supposed to prove? That your crew is expendable, Sarah replied sharply. They sent you in as cannon fodder while they got away. And now they're planning their next move while you rot in here. Derek leaned forward, his bravado cracking. What do you know about my crew? Sarah allowed herself a small, victorious smile. More than you think. And I know one of them is your weak link, the one who gave us just enough to start unraveling this mess. You can either help yourself by cooperating, or I'll leave you to be the fall guy. Your choice. He stared at her, a storm brewing behind his eyes. What do you want? The ambush, Sarah said, her voice low and lethal. You knew exactly where Carter would be. Someone inside the department tipped you off. Who was it? Derek hesitated, his jaw working as if he were weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a guy, a copper. He doesn't give his real name, but we call him the Ghost. He's got access to everything, operations, schedules, everything. He's the one who told us about Carter. Sarah's heart sank at the confirmation of her worst fears. An insider. Someone deeply embedded. Describe him. I don't know much, Derek admitted. Late 30s, maybe 40s. Wears gloves all the time. Talks like he's better than everyone else. That's all I've got. Before Sarah could press further, the door to the interrogation room swung open, and a uniformed officer stepped in. Detective Mills, there's an emergency call for you. Sarah frowned but rose from her chair, leaving Derek with a pointed look. Don't go anywhere. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Carter was sitting up in bed, replaying Sarah's words from earlier. This was a setup. The thought gnawed at him, making his wounds ache all the more. Belle, ever vigilant, stood by the window, her sharp eyes scanning the corridor outside. A knock on the door drew Carter's attention. It was a nurse, her face pale and worried. Detective Carter, she said, her voice trembling. There's been a security breach. Someone's trying to access this ward. Carter's pulse quickened, and Belle let out a warning growl. Lock the doors, Carter ordered, forcing himself to sit upright despite the stabbing pain in his side. He reached for the bedside table, where Sarah had left his sidearm as a precaution. The nurse nodded and rushed out, leaving Carter alone with Belle. The dog's growl deepened, her body tense as she stared at the door. Then, the lights flickered. Carter gripped his gun tightly, his breath shallow. Stay sharp, girl, he whispered. A shadow passed under the door, and Carter's instincts screamed danger. The next moment, the doorknob twisted slowly. The doorknob turned fully, and the door to Carter's hospital room creaked open. Belle stood rigid, her body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Carter raised his sidearm, his heart pounding against his ribs. A man stepped into the room, his face obscured by a black mask and his hand gripping a silenced pistol. His movements were deliberate, calm, like a predator closing in on wounded prey. "Who sent you?" Carter demanded, his voice low and deadly. The intruder didn't respond. Instead, he raised his weapon. Before the man could pull the trigger, Belle lunged with a ferocious snarl, her powerful body colliding with his. The man stumbled back, crashing into the wall as Belle's jaws clamped down on his arm, forcing him to drop the gun. "Good girl!" Carter shouted, struggling to his feet despite the searing pain in his side. The masked man fought desperately, trying to shake off Belle, but she held firm, her growls echoing through the room. Carter used the distraction to grab the man's dropped pistol, leveling it at him. "Call her off," the man gasped, his voice strained with pain. Carter smirked coldly. "You came for me, mate. Now deal with the consequences." Before Carter could press further, two more shadows appeared at the doorway. The reinforcements. Belle released the first man, pivoting toward the newcomers. Carter fired a warning shot, forcing them to scatter back into the hallway. The chaos in the ward was palpable now. Alarms blared, and distant voices shouted orders, but Carter knew it would take time for hospital security, or backup from the station, to reach him. "Belle, with me," he ordered, moving to the edge of the room for better cover. The masked men regrouped, their weapons drawn. Carter fired another shot, this time grazing one of them. Belle launched herself at the nearest attacker, her teeth flashing as she brought him down. But they weren't retreating. They were stalling. Carter's instincts screamed that something was off. Then he heard it, the sound of footsteps pounding up the staircase. A larger group was coming, their movements too coordinated for mere thugs. "Sarah," Carter muttered under his breath. "Where the hell are you?" Across town, Sarah Mills was racing through the streets, her police radio crackling with updates. The emergency call she'd received confirmed her worst fears, an attempt on Carter's life. "Hang on, James," she muttered, swerving through traffic, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. The pieces were falling into place. The ghost had orchestrated the ambush, and now he was tying up loose ends. The attack on Carter wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Whoever the insider was, they didn't just want Carter silenced, they wanted him erased. Back at the hospital, Carter's ammo was running low, and Belle was showing signs of fatigue, her breath heavy but her resolve unshaken. The masked men advanced again, their confidence bolstered by their numbers. Carter's vision swam from pain and exhaustion, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. A deafening sound suddenly tore through the chaos, the blaring wail of police sirens. Sarah burst through the stairwell door with her weapon drawn, her sharp commands cutting through the tension. "Armed police! Drop your weapons!" The masked men hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Carter to take a shot, striking one in the leg. Belle charged another, forcing him to the ground. The remaining attackers scrambled to escape, but they were quickly surrounded by armed officers flooding the ward. Sarah rushed to Carter's side, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "James, are you still here?" Carter interrupted with a weak smile, sinking back onto the bed. "Thanks to Belle." Belle barked softly, collapsing onto the floor beside him, her tail wagging faintly. Sarah knelt beside the dog, running her hand over Belle's coat. "Good girl," she murmured. But Carter's gaze was distant, his mind already on the bigger picture. "Sarah, this wasn't random. They wanted me dead because I'm onto something. We need to find out who the ghost is, before they try again." Sarah nodded grimly. We will. But first, let's get you and Belle somewhere safe. The hospital ward buzzed with activity as officers combed through the wreckage left by the attack. Detective Sarah Mills stood by Carter's bedside, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I need the forensics team here immediately, she barked into the phone. We're looking for anything that can give us a lead, DNA, prints, weapons, everything. Belle lay quietly on the floor, her eyes never leaving Carter. Despite the chaos, her presence remained steady and grounding. Carter shifted on the bed, wincing. Sarah, he said, his voice raspy but resolute. They didn't come here blind. Someone inside gave them my exact location. We can't sit around waiting for answers. We need to act. You can barely stand, Sarah retorted, her tone softening as she glanced at him. Let me handle this. You need to recover. No, Carter said firmly. They won't stop. We have to hit back, hard. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, an officer approached, holding a clear evidence bag containing a small slip of paper. We found this in one of the assailant's pockets, the officer said, handing it over. Sarah inspected the note. It was hastily scrawled but legible, Mill, midnight. The old textile mill, Carter murmured. It's the same place they ambushed me. They're planning something. Sarah's brow furrowed. It could be a trap. It probably is, Carter admitted, his jaw tightening. But it's our best chance to get ahead of them, and find out who the ghost is. Belle let out a low bark, as if echoing Carter's determination. Fine, Sarah said, relenting. But you're not going anywhere near that mill in your condition. I'll take a team. Carter locked eyes with her. Sarah, you'll need Belle. She can track their scent, find hidden entrances. Take her with you. Sarah hesitated, looking at the dog. Belle's priority is keeping you safe. She'll be safer with you, Carter insisted. He turned to Belle, stroking her head. You've got this, girl. Help Sarah. Bring me something we can use. Belle stood, her tail wagging slightly as if she understood every word. Later that night, Sarah and a tactical unit approached the textile mill under the cover of darkness. The rain had started again, its steady rhythm masking their movements. Belle trotted at Sarah's side, her nose already sniffing the air for familiar scents. Keep it tight, Sarah whispered into her radio. No unnecessary noise. If it's a trap, we'll spring it on them instead. The team moved into the mill, their flashlights cutting through the pitch-black interior. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust. Suddenly, Belle stopped, her body tense. She growled softly, her ears pricked forward. What is it, girl? Sarah whispered, raising her weapon. Belle darted forward, leading Sarah to a stack of crates near the back wall. The dog barked sharply, her claws scratching at the floor. Something's under here, Sarah called out to the team. 2 officers joined her, prying the crates aside to reveal a trapdoor hidden beneath layers of dust and debris. Open it, Sarah ordered. The trapdoor creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit tunnel leading underground. Looks like we found their hideout, Sarah muttered. She turned to Belle. Good work, girl. Belle barked in response, her eyes focused and alert. The team descended into the tunnel, the air growing colder and more suffocating with each step. The sound of voices echoed faintly ahead. Sarah motioned for silence, signaling the team to take defensive positions. As they approached a large chamber, they spotted a group of men gathered around a table covered in blueprints and weapons. Sarah's heart raced as she scanned the faces. Her breath caught when she saw one man wearing gloves, his posture confident, his voice carrying authority. That's him, she whispered. That's the ghost. Belle growled softly, her eyes locked on the target. Sarah's radio crackled softly, and she spoke into it. "We've got a visual. Stand by for my signal." But before she could give the order, one of the men turned, his eyes widening as he spotted the team. "Cops!" he shouted, reaching for a weapon. The chamber erupted into chaos. Chaos exploded in the underground chamber. Shouts echoed off the stone walls, and gunfire lit the darkness in brief, searing flashes. Sarah Mills and her team dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off the tunnel's surfaces. Belle sprang into action, her lean body darting forward through the commotion. She tackled one of the gunmen before he could fire, her jaws locking onto his arm with an iron grip. The man screamed, dropping his weapon as two officers surged forward to restrain him. Sarah leaned out from behind a column, her weapon trained on the figure at the center of the chamber, the man in gloves, the ghost. He moved with unsettling calm, barking orders to the others as he grabbed a duffel bag from the table. "You're not getting away!" Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the pandemonium. The ghost turned his head slightly, his expression hidden by the shadows. "You should have stayed out of this, detective," he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. He hurled a smoke grenade to the floor, and thick clouds billowed up, swallowing the room in an acrid haze. "Gas masks on!" Sarah commanded, pulling her own mask into place as her vision blurred. Belle barked sharply, her keen senses unaffected by the smoke. She darted through the cloud, chasing after the ghost. "Belle!" Sarah called out, fear lacing her voice. She motioned to two officers. "With me." Belle moved like a shadow, her nose leading her through the maze of tunnels. The ghost was fast, but Belle was faster. She caught up with him just as he reached a service ladder leading up to the surface. With a growl, she leaped, clamping onto the strap of his duffel bag. "Damn dog," he snarled, kicking at her. Belle held firm, dragging him off balance. The bag fell, spilling its contents, cash, encrypted devices, and a small, unmarked envelope. The ghost pulled a knife from his belt, swinging it toward Belle. "Don't you dare!" Sarah's voice rang out as she emerged from the smoke, her weapon locked on him. The ghost hesitated, the blade inches from Belle. "Drop it," Sarah ordered, her finger on the trigger. "It's over." For a moment, it seemed like he might comply. But then, in a blur of movement, he lunged for the ladder. Sarah fired, the shot grazing his leg and sending him crashing to the ground. Belle lunged again, pinning him down, her teeth bared just inches from his face. "Good girl," Sarah muttered, approaching cautiously. She kicked the knife away and cuffed him. The rest of the team arrived moments later, securing the scene and collecting the scattered evidence. Hours later, back at the precinct, Sarah sat across from the ghost in the interrogation room. His mask of confidence had cracked, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "You're done," Sarah said coldly. "We've got your crew, your cash, and your devices. It's only a matter of time before we trace every dirty deal you've made." The ghost leaned back, a smirk tugging at his lips despite the cuffs biting into his wrists. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You don't even know how deep this goes." Sarah's stomach tightened, but she didn't let it show. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" He chuckled darkly. "It's not just me. You think I'm the only one? There's a whole network inside your department. This doesn't stop with me, detective." Her blood ran cold. Later that night, Sarah returned to the hospital to find Carter awake, sitting up in bed with Belle at his side. "We got him," she said, dropping into the chair beside him. "The ghost?" Carter asked. Sarah nodded, though her expression was grim. "He's not working alone, James. There's more. A network. And it's inside our department." Carter's jaw tightened, his hand resting on Belle's head. "Then we keep going," he said firmly. We tear it down, piece by piece. Belle let out a soft bark, her tail wagging as if in agreement. In that moment, the three of them, Detective Carter, Sarah Mills, and the unshakable Belle, knew the fight was far from over. But together, they would face whatever came next. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.